Good morning, everyone. I have been talking on this text opening the hand of thought, and now I'm talking about the section entitled Self Settling on Itself. If we have this text, page 93. I have already talked twice on this paragraph, but I'd like to continue to talk on this final paragraph of page 93. In the previous paragraph, he said the very basic or fundamental attitude or posture of Buddhism is the true self settling on the true self. So self settling on the self. And when I first read about Buddhism, the book I read was Uchiyama Roshi's book, first book entitled The Self or Jiko. So this, not a topic, but this teaching about the self is really important to me. And Uchiyama Roshi's teaching about the self, Uchiyama Roshi and Saoki Roshi's teaching about the self came from, of course, Dogen Zenji. In Genjo Koan, Dogen Zenji said, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. And this is not Dogen Zenji's unique point, but even in the Blue Cliff record that is made by Chinese Rinzai master also said to study the great way or to penetrate the great way is, and to practice then is to clarify the self. So this, understanding that the essence or most important point to study the Buddha way is to study the self. And in this paragraph, Dogen Zenji said this is not only in China, Zen Buddhism in China and Japan, but also from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha in India. This self-settling in itself is essential or a fundamental attitude of Buddhism. And Uchiyama Roshi quotes 3 of Shakyamuni Buddha's saying from Sutta Nipata and Dhammapada and Parinibbana Sutra or Sutta. And last week I talked about Buddha's saying in Sutta Nipata and Dhammapada. Anyway, let me read this paragraph, page 93. In the Sutta Nipata, which is said to be the oldest Buddhist scripture, the Buddha says, live in the world relying on the self alone as a foundation. Be freed from all things, depending on no thing. In the Dhammapada, he says, the foundation of the self is one self. And in the Mahaparinibbana Sutra, the Sutra of the Great Passing, the Buddha's last days, is the famous phrase, take refuge in self, take refuge in Dharma or truth, take refuge in nothing else. These passages from the earliest scriptures reflect the basic attitude of Shakyamuni himself. However, with even the slightest misunderstanding of this attitude, there is the danger of a very foolish civilization being created. One mistake And today's scientific civilization becomes a kind of madness. If you take one distinctive feature of human nature and develop it as if it were the whole self without seeing the truth of human life, the result is likely to be insane. Anyway, as I said last week, in Stanipata and Dhammapada, what Buddha said is specifically in the Stanipata, in that particular sutta in the Stanipata, Buddha is talking about the people who is worthy to receive donation or offerings. That is that refer to people who reached the Arhat stage. And what Buddha said is about those people, people who subdue or control the self, or subdue the self. And another point is people who live without thought of self, or in that translation said I. And those people who live as the island of the self. So it seems there are two sides. One is that those people subdue or control themselves, the self, and live without the thought of the self. Then those people are living as island of the self. This kind of a contradicted. So we need to think about what is the self. Buddha doesn't explain, what the relation between these two sides of the self, and that is how or why, in the history of Buddhist philosophy, after Buddha's death for 2,500 years, there are many different kinds of interpretation and explanation about what is the self. And another important point is one of the most important point of Buddha's teaching is no self, or anattama in Sanskrit. What is the relation of this teaching of no self or anattama and this teaching about the self? This is another very important point of Buddhist study and also our practice. So to me, this is a very important point, even within our practice and also within our life. What is this self? Anyway, my understanding, this anattama and this teaching of the self is not contradicted. That is my understanding. But let me talk about my understanding of this relation between the teaching of no self and teaching about the self next week. This week, I'd like to talk on another quote which Amrosh picked. That is Buddha's saying from the Mahaparinibbana Sutra. And Mahaparinibbana Sutra or Sutta is a part of Digha Nikaya in Pali canon. And this sutta is a description of Buddha's final days. When he was about 8 years old, he somehow started to travel from Gorcha Peak, where he taught many years, and it seems he was traveling to the north. That means people think maybe there's no evidence, but maybe he was trying to go back to his home country in Nepal. Anyway, but he died, but he passed away on his way at Kushinagara. Anyway, this sutra is about his final travel. And part of that sutra, it says Buddha and his, in the beginning, he traveled with many monks. And he arrived at a small village named Biluba. And it seems it was in the, not in, but before the rainy season. So Buddha asked his monks to have, 3 months practice period. It's not with him this time. Said, when they reached this village, Buddha said, you monks should go to anywhere in Vasari. Vasari is a big city at the time, or Vaishali, where you have friends or acquaintances or supporters, and spend the rains there, spend the rainy season with your friends or supporters. I shall spend the rainy season here in Biluba. So he practiced only himself and Ananda, his attendant, 2 of them. So he and his assembly kind of spend the summer practice period separately. Then Buddha had a sickness, very heavy, serious sickness. It says, and during the rains, the Lord was attacked by a severe sickness with sharp pains, as if he were about to die. But he endured all this mindfully, clearly aware, and without complaining. And this seems he restored his health a little bit. So he get out of his bed and talked with Ananda. Then the Lord, having recovered from his sickness, as soon as he felt better, went outside and sat on a prepared seat in front of his dwelling. Then the Venerable Ananda came to him, saluted him, sat down to one side and said, so Ananda was the only person who was attending to Buddha. Lord, I have seen the Lord in comfort, and I have seen the Lord's patient enduring. And Lord, my body was like a drunkard. I lost my beings, and things were unclear to me because of the Lord's sickness, because Buddha was so in so much severe sickness. Ananda suffered, and he couldn't know what he should do. The only thing that was some comfort to me was the thought, the Lord will not attain final nirvana, final nirvana. In this case means entering nirvana. That means dying. So he said, Buddha will not enter nirvana or not die until he has made some statement about the order of the monks. So Ananda said, before Shakyamuni died, he must say something about his Sangha. What should be done after his death. So until he did so, he would not die. So Ananda had some comfort. He believed that this is not the time Shakyamuni passed away yet. But Shakyamuni answered to Ananda. And I think this is a really important point in Buddhism. But Ananda, what does the order of monks, Sangha of monks, expect of me? What do monks in his assembly expect me? I have taught the Dhamma or Dharma, Ananda, making no inner and outer. The Tathagata has no teacher's fist in respect of doctrines. Teacher's fist means something hidden and not teach. That means he taught everything he needs to teach. So nothing is hidden. If there is anyone who thinks, any teachers who thinks, I shall take charge of the order, take charge of the asanga or assembly or a community, or the order should refer to me. Order should refer to me. I think this means people in this community should rely on me or depend on me. Let him make some statement about the order, but the Tathagata does not think in such terms. So Shakyamuni said he didn't think he's in charge of the Sangha, or or people in the Sangha should depend on him, rely on him. So this is one of the meaning of monks should rely on themselves. They could not, or they should not depend on even Shakyamuni. So Shakyamuni is a teacher, but in order to be awakened, those monks have to practice by themselves. Teacher cannot practice for them. And this is very important attitude. And this is one of the meaning of, the island of the self is only the self. So why should the Tathagata make a statement about the order? So Buddha negated Ananda's expectation that he will not die before he said something about the Sangha or community after his death. Then he started to talk again to Ananda. And he talks about himself, his condition at that time. Ananda, I am now old, worn out. He said, I'm worn out. Venerable, one who has traversed life's span. That means his life is getting, the end of his life is getting closer. I have reached the term of life, which is 80. So he was 80 years old, so he said, now I am reaching the end of my life. Just as an old cart is made to go by being held together with straps. So the old cart is almost falling apart, but with this straps, they could kept in together. So he said his body was like that kind of old cart, together with straps. So the Tathagata's body is kept going by being strapped up. So he's talking about the impermanence of his own life. It is only when the Tathagata withdraws his attention from outward signs and by the cessation of certain feelings, enters into the signless concentration of mind. Signless concentration of mind. In Japanese, this signless means muso without form. So this is a kind of samadhi that he doesn't see the form. And in this case, form means things outside, the object of our six sense organs, and also form referred to his own body. So when he enters this samadhi of no form or formlessness, that his body knows comfort. That means unless he was not in this samadhi, he had pain. And he felt, his body was taken apart. So his life, his body is impermanent. Then Buddha said, therefore, Ananda, you should live as islands. Here he said, you should live as islands unto yourselves. So you should be the island or foundation or master of yourself. Being your own refuge, with no one else as your refuge, with the Dhamma as an island, with the Dhamma as your refuge, with no other refuge. So this is what he said about the self and Dhamma. Self is the self, and Dhamma is teaching, and also the truth. In this translation, it said capital D Dhamma. That means not the teachings, but truth, or Buddha's teachings about the truth, the absolute Dhamma. So Buddha said, the monks, his disciples, should live as the island of themselves, and also make Dhamma as their island, nothing else. So he said, even they could not rely on him. That means Buddha or Tathagata. Any others, only the self and the truth, or the teaching about the truth, are their foundation or refuge of the self. This is the context Buddha said we should live as the island or foundation of the self. And Dharma should be the island and the foundation of the self. And finally he said, how does a monk live as an island unto himself? So how monks can live as the island of themselves. And he says, here Ananda, a monk, abides contemplating the body as body, earnestly, clearly aware, mindful and having put away all hankering and fretting for the world, and likewise with regard to feelings, mind and mind object. That Ananda is how a monk lives as an island unto himself, with no other refuge. And those who now in my time or afterwards live thus, they will become the highest, if they are desirous of learning. So the way monks can live at their own island or foundation is to see or to contemplate those four things. First, it said contemplating the body as body. Earnestly, clearly aware, mindful, and having put away all hankering and fretting for the world, and likewise with regard to feeling. So body, feeling, and mind, and mind object. As they are. And those four in Chinese is Xin, body, and feeling is Ju, feeling or sensation. That is the second of the five skandhas. So Xin is this body, and Ju is sensation, and the mind is, of course, Shin or Chitta in Sanskrit. Shin. And mind object is Ho in Chinese, means Dharma, but in this case, this Dharma means each and every phenomenal being. And this contemplation about those four things is very basic teaching or practice in the early Buddhism. And it is said we should see the body as impure or fuzhou. And we should see Ju or sensation or feeling as suffering, or Ku, dukkha, and mind as impermanent. That is mujou. Impermanence. And Ho as muga. Muga means no self. But in this case, this can be translated as no substance. So those are what monks should contemplate and be free from, in this translation, hankering, that means clinging and desire. So when we see body impure instead of pure, and when we see feelings or sensation is suffering, then we don't attach ourselves to the sensation, whether pleasant or unpleasant sensation. And mind as impermanent means our mind is always changing. So we can't rely on our mind. And mind object means namarupa, the things we encounter day after day, is no substance. And then we can be free from this clinging. And this means we need to be free from clinging to ourselves, both our body and mind, and the things outside other than ourselves. So both self and other things are impure, suffering, and impermanent, and no self or no substance. So I think this teaching is saying the same thing, that in order to be the island of the self, we need to be free from the self. So this is not so simple teaching. There are in the Buddha's sayings in Suttanipata and Dhammapada, there are two sides. One is we should subdue or control ourselves, and we should live without the thought of the self. Then we can be the island of the self. And I think this is the same thing. This means we need to be free from our clinging to the self. Then we can be the island of the self. Here is a kind of a strange, kind of a twisted logic, and Buddha didn't explain the structure of this logic. I think that's why from these teachings, there are many different interpretations and theory were developed in the history of Buddhism. So this sutta, Parinibbana Sutta, is saying is, Buddha's life is impermanent. He was dying. And yet, if we practice following Buddha's teaching, that is, body is impure, we should not cling to our body, and feeling is suffering. Maybe suffering is not the right word. This means we cannot, how can I say, control the feeling, present and unpleasant feeling. That's why it's not possible to be 100% satisfied. So this satisfactoriness of feelings, and our mind is always changing, and nothing has substance. Actually, these are the teaching of impermanence and no substance or no self. And in the Mahayana teaching, this is called emptiness. When we see emptiness of the self and everything we encounter, and being free from clinging to ourself and the object, then we can live as an island or a foundation of ourselves. Does this make sense? Then we have to understand what this self which need to be controlled, and what is the self which can be the island or foundation. These two, as a concept, seems different. Are these two different self? One is something which we should subdue or control, and another is the self which can be the very peaceful, stable foundation of our life? That is, I think, next question we have to ask. So what Buddha is saying here is the same as what that is said in another sutra. This is not from Pali Canon, but there is a Chinese translation of the Sutra of Buddha's final teaching. In Chinese or Japanese, we call the sutra as Butsu Yui Kyo Gyo. Buddha's Yui Kyo, Yui means being left, and the Kyo is teaching. So this means last teaching, final teaching as Buddha's will. The Sutra of Buddha's last or final teaching. This is also described right before Buddha entered Nirvana. And in this sutra, Buddha gave final teachings to the monks. And basically, within this sutra, what Buddha taught is about the Hachidai Ningaku. That is 8 awakening of great beings. So he taught about 8 points of our practice. And when Dogen Zenji knew he was dying when he was 53 years old, he wrote very short writings about this Hachidai Ningaku, 8 awakenings of great beings. That is Shobogenzo Hachidai Ningaku. That was Dogen's final writing. This is the last fascicle within Shobogenzo. So this teaching is also important. But after Shakyamuni taught about those 8 aspects of awakening, what Buddha said is after his death, he said he to his disciples, after his death, his monks should keep practice, following his teaching, his Dhamma. Then, within their practice, it said Buddha's Dharma body. Dharma body of Tathagata will appear, and it's indestructible. That means if we practice following Buddha's teaching, and this is Buddha's teaching. If we practice means live following Buddha's teaching based on this kind of teaching, then within our practice, Buddha's Dharma body manifested, revealed. That is what is said in this another sutra. And this sutra might be much later than Parinibbana Sutra, and we can find only Chinese translation. Anyway, I think this is a source of the idea of Rupa Kaya and Dharma Kaya. Rupa means material, and Kaya is body. Body as a material, and Dharma body or Dharma Kaya when Shakyamuni passed away, his rupa or material body disappeared. And Buddha didn't negate the disappearing of his body. But he, in the Pali Parinibbana Sutra, there's no such concept of Dharma body or Dharmakaya. But I think later, this idea of Dharmakaya or Dharma body, there is developed after Buddha's death, of course. That means because Buddha said, you are the refuge of yourself, and Dharma is a refuge of yourself. And I think Buddha's disciples thought, fat made this person, Shakyamuni, into Buddha. And they thought Dharma. Because of his awakening to capital D Dharma or Dharma. And he thought about this Dharma or truth as his teaching, that is small d Dharma. His teaching and the truth he taught is actually what made Shakyamuni as Buddha. Buddha means awakened one, means he awakened to the truth, and he taught about that truth to his students. So actually, his teaching that is about this truth, capital D Dharma, is actually the Buddha. So they started to think Dharma is Buddha, Buddha is Dharma. And later, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, this Dharma body kind of, how can I say, developed and grew much larger than Buddha's Shakyamuni's teaching. But for example, one of the important Mahayana sutras called Kegonkyo or Avatamsaka Sutra, the Dharma body Buddha was called I forget the name. Vairochana Buddha. And Mahayana people thought this Vairochana Buddha as Dharma body is this universe itself. The way things are, that is Dhamma, is Buddha. Anyway, so when he talks about the self, this self is not so simple. There's a kind of a structure within this idea of self. And this is very difficult point to talk or explain in English. If Dharma body is this entire universe, this is one thing. But it said each and every beings, all the mind object, each and every phenomenal beings are also Dharmakaya. Because there is no such entirety of universe without collection of each and every phenomenal beings and the interconnectedness of those small individual beings. So in the later Mahayana teachings, these individual beings and the entirety of the interconnectedness of those phenomenal beings are kind of an important point. And we are part of this interconnectedness. not only things, but each one of us. So we are phenomenal beings, which is impermanent, and our body is not pure, and our mind or our feelings or sensation is dissatisfactory, and our mind is always changing. So, the things we encounter as a mind object has not substantial. So we cannot rely on anything. This self as impermanent and egoless. That means emptiness. What is this individual beings? And what is the entirety of this interconnectedness as a Dharmakaya? This is become a very important point of Buddhist teachings, especially in Mahayana. And when Dogen teaches about the self, to study the self is to study the Buddha way is to study the self, and to study the self is to forget the self. That is to see the self as impermanent and no substance is to forget the self. Then we see we are all connected within this interconnectedness or this enlargement. And if we are free from this self-clinging, then we see, we are all connected with this entire Dhamma body. There's no such separation between this individual self and this entirety of interconnectedness. Then, this self and this Buddha Dharmakaya is the same thing. But in order to do, in order to see and experience that, we should be free from this separation by seeing impermanence and egolessness or selflessness of the self. And when Dogen and Uchamuro said to study the Buddha way is to study the self, or with self settling within the self, they are talking about this structure of the self and this as a individual self, and also as a part of this interconnectedness. These two kind of aspects of the self is two separate things or one thing, and they are both. If we think we are Dhammakaya, then we are mistaken. But if we say we are not, then that is another mistake. So we cannot say either as a kind of a theory, or we cannot grasp this self as either this individual personal self and one with entirety. We are the both. Well, it's already 11:05. So what I'm saying here today is what Uchamuro and Dogen Zenji and Chinese Zen talking about the self, and what Shakyamuni Buddha taught in the early Buddhist scriptures are not so different. At least there's some thread, some relation. There's no, how can I say, gap between these two as a two completely different teachings or idea. So there's some kind of thread as a development in the history of Buddhist teaching. That is what I have to say this morning. As I said, next week I'm talking about my understanding of this teaching of the self and anatman or no self. Actually, what I said is the answer. So I already said, but I try to make it a little more clear. Any question? Thank you for your patience.
I'm sorry I have such difficulty with the terms. Would you refresh my mind for the term that Buddha used when he was dying? And he said, I only find peace in the state of, and then I tried to retain the term, but I couldn't. What was that term?
Okay. It is only when the Tathagata withdraw his attention from outward signs. This sign is, as I said, soul or forms, outward forms as an object of our mind.
But you
and next outward signs, and by the cessation of certain feelings, enters into the signless concentration of mind. Signless means without forms. Signless, no form, concentration is samadhi of mind. That his body knows comfort.
And you use the term Yongmu or
Muso.
Muso. Okay.
Yeah. So
That's
means form. Yes.
Okay. What I'm grappling with is trying to figure out the difference between Muso and Yunga.
Yunga.
That term you've got it right. I'm sorry.
Muga.
Muga.
Muga is no self or anatman.
Now, one of those, it would seem to me, the state has to be permanent. The first state the element of existence. Again, I don't quite know how to put this, but as Buddha moved towards the state of Muso,
no form,
then I would think that's permanent.
Permanent means doesn't change.
Unchanging.
Unchanging.
You but mean at the same time,
what is unchanging? Muso or his mind?
Well, that's what I don't know. But the movement. The last time when I was asking my question, I used the term movement, and you pulled me up short and said, "What do you mean by movement?" And I gave you an answer that I have fretted about all week because it was inadequate, and I don't know what I meant by movement. But it seems to me that the distinction between, I'm so bad at these terms, I'm sorry, between Muso and Muga is the idea that there has to be some kind of movement. And it's the same imagery as being the island of yourself, because you're moving towards being an island, and it's the same imagery that we have with the lilies in the field, toiling not and not fretting about their existence. And the movement towards that state of permanent, I guess almost acceptance of the true self as opposed to the non-atma self. It seems to me that that's the reconciliation between the 4 or 5 teachings of illusion and mind objects and that sort of thing has to come down to a sense of permanence, non-movement, where you become an island. I'm sorry, it just seems to me that I guess the essence of the question is there movement? And is the movement towards permanence? And is that the real difference between the Atma and the non-Atma?
Maybe when you talk about movement, are you talking about sort of changing from attachment to a notion of self to non-attachment?
It's that, but it's a lot more than that, because it seems to me that at the same time, we still got the teaching of the chief cook, and that is really troublesome when you put it with this, because he goes to get his mushrooms. He's asked to stay and have a dialogue about Dharma. And he says, I can't do that. The more important thing is to get back and cook my mushrooms for the Sangha, because if I don't do it, who else will? So there's that externality of the physical being having to do the tasks of living. And at the same time, while he's doing that, he's moving towards an interstate, not like I-69, but interstate, an interstate, internal state of achieving the dissolving of all the illusions about existence, because he's wholeheartedly engaging in what he's doing. And therefore, he's becoming the island too. At the same time, he's physically moving within society to get that done. And somehow, I think, when Buddha's saying, I'm dying and I have nothing more to teach, I've already done it. You just got to put it together. That it's the putting together how we reconcile our daily activity with the achievement of internal peace. And that's the negation, think, of the Atma and the non-Atma.
What you said about the practice by the Tenzo is, I think, that's the same thing with what is said in this final teaching of Buddha. That means within our practice means practice moment by moment. Each day we need to do different things. So we have to adjust ourselves what we are doing. One time the Tenzo is walking to the ship to buy the mushroom, and he returned to the monastery and cook next day. So he does different things each moment. That is impermanent. But within each practice in each moment, each day, the Buddha's Dharma body is manifested in it. So in that sense, as it is said in the sutra, this Dharma body is eternal and indestructible. But this eternal and indestructible Buddha body is manifested only within our day-to-day, moment-by-moment practice. So to me, here is a kind of a oneness or interpenetration of impermanence and eternity. And eternity is revealed only within our impermanent day-to-day practice. But I cannot explain, with a kind of using some kind of a concept. Whether, is this the same as Atman or not Atman?
Well,
And
I feel more peaceful. I'm a greater peace about the teachings of this week than I was last in any event. So I think I'm starting to see.
And the point of Zen teaching is not kind of a conceptualize those points, whether this self as impermanent and individual and phenomenal, and this a self that is connected with entire being, entire network. But that as a kind of a skillful means, for example, Chamorro said, karmic or individual limited beings, self, and universal self. But if we conceptualize these two things, then I think unless we are very careful, it becomes Atman and Brahman. So we must be very careful about this. So we have to see this within our activity, our actual daily lives, instead of creating another kind of a system of philosophy. I think that is the point of Zen teaching. Thank you for your patience. I think this is really important and very difficult point in entire Buddhist teachings, in whatever lineage or traditions. Actually, still, if we think about the Atman and Anatman in terms of reincarnation or transmigration, then to me, still, there's a contradiction. Why reverse is possible if there's no fixed, permanent self?
Well, that goes to my initial question of which
Yeah.
state was permanent.
Yeah. And I don't have any good answer.
I think it's I don't know, let me think a week or two.
Okay, please. Please.
I don't really understand how the Dharma body can be eternal or permanent, because it seems to me that everything is always changing. So that's something that I'm wondering.
Well, within this network, everything is changing.
Uh-huh.
But I think the point is this network is always there.
Oh, okay.
Therefore, whenever we practice following Buddha's teaching, then we practice this Dharmakaya. So this Dharmakaya is never destructed, never disappeared, always revealed, always revealed. Please.
I think, in a sense, in terms of like modern physics, the idea of there's no increase and no decrease in the total universe.
Yeah. That's helpful too. Thank you.
Any more question, please?
I was kind of struck when you were reading that passage of the Buddha about taking refuge only in the Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
Because, later, now we talk about the triple refuge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's the notion of taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
Sangha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that a Mahayana kind of development?
I don't think so. Taking refuge in three treasures is, I think, from the time of Shakyamuni. I think.
It's interesting, he says, take refuge in nothing else. In that passage, he said, take refuge in nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Well, Buddha is a teacher of the Dharma, and Sangha is a practitioner of the Dharma. So I think those three are about the Dharma. They are not different from Dharma, I think. And Sangha, or practitioners, are kind of, how can I say, transmit and maintain the Dharma as a teaching and practice after Buddha's death. I think.
It's just kind of curious, the notion of island, island kind of, sort of suggests isolation in a way.
Isolation, separation. Mm. Another possible translation is like a torch. The word I think it's said in the footnote. Let's see. The word it is said in the sutta is Dubipa. And Dubipa means island in the river, like Ganges, huge river. But this can be deeper. Deeper is a part of Dipankara Buddha. That means a torch or flame or light. And this translator says, this deeper means lamp, but we do not really know whether the Buddha pronounced the two words alike or not. Whether he said dvipa or deeper. In the absence of such knowledge, it is perhaps best not to be too dogmatic about the meaning. In any case, it is just oneself that one has to have as one's island or lamp, not some great self, which the Buddha did not teach. So, of course, from the Theravada Buddhist point of view, there's no such great self. So it might be lamp or island. Lamp is kind of the help when we are in the complete darkness, we cannot see anything. But when we have a lamp or torch, we can see. Please.
Yeah, but both the island and the torch as a metaphor.
Yes.
If I'm getting back to the movement thing, but both of them, the purpose of the torch, I would think, would be to see the movement around you.
Yeah.
Could be the internal enlightenment, but you wouldn't need a torch for that. And the island has the imagery of the water moving around it. So somehow this enlightenment that we get has got to take into account all what's either being illuminated around us or what's moving around us, which gets back to Indira's net. However, you do that, and then you take the Dharmakaya as a later construct. I don't know where I go with that, but I find that really troublesome because I don't quite see how that reconciles with Buddha's initial teaching of purely internal self-enlightenment.
Yeah, that is a good question. Please keep that question. I don't have a good answer.
What if you saw eternity as the human condition? And in that way, we're in humanity, all of us, we're always dealing with the same thing. But the island with the water, I think the idea of the water is very important because everything around us is always changing. If we're not grasping, we're kind of being with those changes. So that becomes a way of saying, these are always the issues that we're going to be dealing with. And if we're an island unto ourselves and we're not, it maybe humanity is sort of the net, one big island. And that's always the way it's going to be because that's who we are.
That's our practice, and the reason why we study Dhamma, I think. And not instead of building another system of philosophy, we have to find the answer our own answer within our life, how to live, how to practice, and how we live together with other beings with this impermanent body and mind. I think that is the point of Zen teaching. Okay, it's already 11:30.